Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Dorset Historical Society third Thursday lunchtime lecture series. This is the last one for the year, and this is ending the 10th year of our lectures. We're working on our 11th year, which will start in January, and we've got a great slate of possibilities, so stay tuned for that. Today, though, we're ending the year with a bang with Peter Palmer. He has lived in the area since 1964. In 1981, he started historical projects, and I'm sure there was nothing hysterical about it.
It was pretty funny, yes.
Where he would restore old homes, which has been a lifelong passion of his. And right now he'll be doing a presentation on Gone, 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 some of the houses that have gone and have been saved. And without further ado, please welcome Peter Palmer.
Well, thanks all for coming out on a day that was your probably last really good gardening day. And anyway, so often I think that, in the historical societies and so on, that we're really sort of, what would we say, sort of, lecturing to the choir, because I think we're all so like-minded on so many of these things. But I would hope that maybe if you glean something today, that you can be a disciple and sort of go out and grab a friend by the throat and say, don't do that, or yeah, that's a good idea, And anyway, so I have to thank Michelle Pagan for helping me extensively organizing some of these things. I've been collecting pictures of old stuff for ever, and we had hundreds of them, and sort of picking through to decide what we might want to use here was a rather interesting project. Well, anyway, going, gone, or not, and the or not part is sort of up to us. And those of you who were here last month for Michelle's talk saw this slide, but we can see how in a very short amount of time, this was approximately, what was that date there, Michelle? I can't quite remember.
1875?
1875, yeah. And how this building has been degraded to this point. And so have we really lost this? In other words, is this gone or is it not gone? Well, sort of reminds me of an old joke where this fellow went to a farm, stopped by, and this three-legged pig was running around. And he said to the farmer, "What's the story on the three-legged pig?" And the guy said, "Well, that's our favorite pig. It's a wonderful pig. It saved our lives twice. One time the river flooded and the pig squealed and squealed, and we were able to get away before the flood took out part of our house. Another time our house was on fire and the pig squealed and squealed and brought us out so that we weren't burned." He said, "Yeah, but what's with the three legs?" And he said, "Well, you don't eat a good pig like that all in one setting." So anyway, this may be a little bit of that story. In other words, this poor pig has it been eaten? It's still there, but what's the story? Well, anyway, why is preservation important? What we have out there and what we live with is, in our built environment, in a way it's who we are. And everything we see, I think, in good proportion, bad proportion, so on, either pleases or displeases us. And if we think about what we liked or what we didn't like, this is an old place that I had in East Dorset. This is the Deming House. And back when I bought it, the question was, would it survive? And this has been on that corner down there since 1786, and it started out as a farmhouse and then was expanded to a tavern by Benjamin Deming in about 1820, and it was lived in by Frank Benedict and his wife, who was a Deming, for some 70 years. And Frank really didn't ever want to do anything with the house because he didn't own it. And Helen wouldn't give it to him because Frank was a rather notorious drunk, and she was afraid that he'd sell it because he sold just about everything else. And anyway, at this point, it was in very, very sad shape. And the question was, would it go or not? And in fact, I had I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but I had an in-law from Alabama, and he was up here and he looked at this place with me. And at that time, I'd done quite a lot of work on it and restored quite a bit of it. And I thought it was looking pretty good. And he sitting there and he said, "If you decided to sell this place, do you think anybody'd ever buy it?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't know, probably." And he said, yeah, they'd probably tear it down and build something nice. And anyway, so that's the way some people think about things. Anyway, I didn't think about it that way, so there it was, and here it is, and I think it really adds to our built environment experience as we, so to say, as we ride around town. Let's see. This is going, gone, or not. Unfortunately, I think most of you know this. This is in North Dorset, and that's the old school. I remember when I first came here, I think it was Dewey Woolens at that point. Let's see, there was a great little bell that used to sit up there. I think it was Marge Cook moved here and put an antique shop in there, and she and her husband added this little garage to the side. Well, now it's obviously going downhill, and you know, will we save it or not? Will it be saved or not? And I guess that's sort of up to whatever happens. I'm trying to think here. George Connors went to this school. I don't know many you know George, but his son Mike and brothers are the house movers nowadays around here. And George went to this school, and they didn't care much for the school. I think it was master, because I think he referred to it as a hymn. But anyway, and Halloween they put a carriage up on top of this roof up here, and they thought that was all pretty funny. Anyway, so just a little tidbit. This we all know, little blacksmith shop just in South Dorset, and I think all of us have watched this one disappear for the past number of years. Back early on in the 60s and 70s, Charles Eichel had an antique shop there. It was called Dorset Trading Company, and it's a very neat building. It was a very neat building. It had the old forge in there and all the trappings, and that stuff's probably in there. This is an old photograph that was in the Historical Society, in the Dorset Historical Society collection, and I think probably this building is this building here. But there's again some good history available on this particular building. And across the street was the Phelps House and Barn. I guess it was a very prosperous sheep operation at the time. But anyway, that's where we are today with that. I think you all know this one in the Shelburne Museum. This was in North Dorset, very close to the proximity of the schoolhouse that the couple of slides back. And of course, that one was saved by Electra Havemeyer Webb, and that one is now the, I think, Decoy Museum at Shelburne. And terrific old place, and a great save. We know that one. I think that this sort of looked pretty good back when it was a gas station in the 60s. Unfortunately, I think a couple of brothers got into a dispute about ownership. One of them decided if they couldn't own it, the other wasn't going to own it, so it got lit on fire at one point. And again, that's continually deteriorated. I heard through the rumor mill that maybe Rob Giotti was interested in trying to do something with the town and possibly pull off a save on that one, but we'll see where that goes. So again, that really fits into our going, gone, or not. And I think a lot of that or not is up to us, you know, as the citizens of this town and this area to keep an eye on these things and to see if we want to keep them around. Okay, this is the Samuel Strong house. Now Samuel Strong, this is in Vergennes, and Samuel Strong, it didn't say, in reading about him, I couldn't find whether he was actually military or civilian, but he apparently directed the American troops at Ticonderoga. Now directed, what does that mean? I don't know. But anyway, apparently he was a well-to-do gentleman, built this house. Now, again, I don't know what the story on this house is, but in the summertime you can't see it at all as you drive by on Route 22A. It's just, you just can't see it. This time of year, that's what it looks like. It's got a great roof and a good foundation. As far as I could see, I walked around it a couple of times, and it hasn't had any attention for at least 20 years. But it's holding up pretty well, and whether it's one of those situations where it's involved or tied up in an estate or whatever might be, again, all of these things have a story. Okay, design principles, and as we look at scale, balance, proportion, rhythm, massing. Let me flip ahead here a little bit. Now, Asher Benjamin wrote 7 books on design. You see, he was born here in Hartford, Connecticut in 1773. And Asher Benjamin's 7 books greatly influenced everything that we see in much of our New England and even East Coast architecture, at least. And he was deeply committed to, I would say, Greek form. You know, he studied it and did a great job presenting it in these manuals to the local builders as to how to do this stuff. Because I think as we go through so many of our New England towns and our eastern towns, we see so much of this Greek influence. And of course, I guess as we look at proportion, move on here a sec. Okay. As we look at the, let me hop ahead here to the Adam brothers. Asher Benjamin was a student, basically, of the Adam brothers. And the Adam brothers were the sort of the style police of England, so to say, for many, many years. And so much of the English architecture in the Georgian style was developed from drawings by the Adam brothers and work by the Adam brothers and basically the Adam style. So all of this I think this architecture as we see it was sort of passed down from one to the next, but then picked up and really became, you know, all of what we see that we like. Now maybe some of you recognize this house that's not there anymore. It used to be on the West Road, and we lost it just recently, unfortunately. We'll get back to that at another time. Okay, Thomas Dake was a builder in Castleton, Vermont. And Thomas Royal Dake, as much as I could read about him, didn't really think all that much about himself and just called himself sort of a designer, builder. But his work is magnificent. And if you have traveled Main Street in Castleton and up the side streets a little bit, you'll see so much of his work there. And he was an absolute master of the federal style. All right, we'll hop ahead here a little bit to scale. And as we look at scale, everything has to be in scale. In other words, this is sort of a small scale. In fact, let me jump around here a second. That scale is based on the human body to architectural scale, basically. So if we could look at this scale, which is sort of a smaller scale or a larger scale, the human body still fits into all of this. And this is what makes it comfortable for us. If something is really out of the human scale, then we feel cold in it. We just don't feel, the ceilings are too high, the something's too big. This just doesn't work. This particular architectural piece just feels uncomfortable. And the real reason, I believe, for that, from everything I can see, is it's simply out of the scale you as a human feel good in. And I don't know if there's a better way to say that, but it's just the way it is. Now this is the Eagle Tavern in East Pulteney. And this is a fairly large building, but it's built as a large building. It's built on a small human scale. In other words, the columns are small. The windows are 12 over 12, or 12 lights, 12 window panes over 12 window panes, and they're 7 by 9 inch glass, which was extremely common. And it has a fairly a larger doorway for significance. They sort of drop 2 smaller windows in up here to make for interest, and it's a really neat, very, very appealing looking building. It's on a small scale. Where here is a building that's almost similar in size, and I think our pictures don't really indicate that. But this is in East Pulteney, this is in Castleton. And the actual length of this building, and the length of this building, and the height of this building, and the height of that building are very similar. Yet this is on a large scale. The columns are larger, the windows are larger, so we kind of have this situation here, and then the smaller scale here, as we have in these 2 lower pictures. Everybody can see that if I'm not standing in the way. Anyway, so scale is extremely important in what we're looking at. Now, this is probably one of the biggest of all, is the balance. So we have here in the center a static balance. In other words, everything is virtually balanced by one element's balanced by another element. This window is the same as that window, this window, center doorway. It's absolutely this balance block here. Over here, this works because we have a dynamic balance. We move these elements around, but we move them around so that they work and they create a balance. Over here, somebody goofed because this house is tipping over to the right. So as we look at these things, and especially as we look at them in a lot of modern architecture, you'll look at a building and you'll say, there's just something wrong with that building. chances are it's either not in the human scale or it's out of balance. So what happened? Well, anyway, examples, this is Thomas Dake, did this in Castleton, and you can see, I just noticed one chimney is a little different from the other, but, and that's a later change because it would not have been originally like that. But anyway, this is a pretty good example of dynamic balance. This is another Dake home in Castleton, and this is a very good example of static, or where are we? Dynamic balance. This is static balance. Dynamic balance, because here you have a porch over here that sort of balances up the doorway being over here. You have a chimney that's just slightly to the right. You have a greater space between windows here and here, and this is centered over the doorway. These two windows are centered over each other. So this house dynamically works. So you look at this house and you go, wow, that's a pretty good looking house. And you look at this house and I think the eye says, that's a pretty good looking house. Now here, I had a fairly hard time finding a really good imbalance, because in the good old days, they didn't build too many screwed up houses. So this one, I think, as an example maybe of imbalance, where this is very heavy over here, or it almost looks like you could grab this side of the house with your hand and beat this side of the house with it, you know. But again, just from an example standpoint, if we look at it and our personal visions of good and bad architecture, you know, and I don't think good and bad architecture is subjective. I think it's really objective. I think that people say, well, that's a matter of opinion, but is it a matter of opinion, or do they have a lousy eye? Or did they grow up in Texas? You know, I don't know. But you know, it's true. It is really true that you can look at some modern. I'm losing a name here. Who was our most famous modern guy from 1920s?
Corbusier?
What's that?
Corbusier?
No.
Frank
Lloyd Wright. Thank you. Frank Lloyd Wright. If you look at Frank Lloyd Wright's work, it's in the human scale, and it balances, or it dynamically balances. You know, the one he built on the rock in Woods Hole, fabulous house. You know, very, very modern, very way ahead of its time. But you look at that house and you say, wow, that's striking. That's a good-looking house. And the reason is good architects stick to these rules: human scale and balance. Now, proportion. That's the next thing that's extremely important, is how they deal with proportion. And this is the magic number, 3-5. And if we look at a house that's most of Nantucket, which everybody goes to Nantucket and says, gee, this is a great looking place. Most of Nantucket is 3-5. And the interesting thing is the windows are 3-5. And when you look at the earlier panes of glass, the oldest is 6 inches by 9 inches, built into any different window size you want, you know, a 12 over 12, 9 over 6, whatever. It ends up, especially in this configuration of the 6 over 6 window, you come up with this 3-5. And then you take a horizontal line that's 5 and put a vertical 5 into it and into this 3 high, then you come up with something that has eye appeal. Now, if you take this window and put it horizontally in here, and put it horizontally here, and one horizontally there, your eye looks at that and says, that's awful. Because it is. Who knows? The eye, I think, you know, really helps us. If we look at this building, this is very much in human scale, even though it's a large building. I guess you all know which that one is. The old music hall. Was, right, that's from the Going, Gone. You know, I will say I'm all in favor of spending $13 million on a rec building at Dana Thompson Park if we can do a good job with it and provide something for the community and for the future and for our kids and for our seniors. But I hate to spend what will be $15 million at Dana Thompson Park and have this building demolished, because that was a darn good looking building before the third floor was added on top of it. And again, it's really done within a pretty good scale. And if you look at it, you have almost a 3x5. You have pretty much a 3 going here and a 5 going here, and then you have another 3 here and another 5 here. You have pretty much another 5 here and another 3 here. This gets a little crowded, but what they did to uncrowd this, because these windows were coming tall into here, they put those round windows in there. So good architects really had a great way of using this and creating that. Okay, rhythm. Rhythm is really important, because if you look at your I think modern design colonial house by somebody who really, you know, ate the covers off the books when they were in architectural school, they don't use good rhythm. If you'll see that they try to make everything the same. You know, your modern colonial house, most of them, because we build with 8-foot ceilings, end up being over 16 feet tall. They're too tall, the windows are too small, generally too wide. But anyway, here as we look at, up here, we have sort of an interesting rhythm. And also here, this kind of works, and as does this work. And you see the dots are not exactly the same relationship to each other, because these window placements in these buildings sort of move. Now, this is an example here, even though I think the windows are a little bit oversized for the house, and they're 2/2s, which who knows what they were originally. But this house it has a little bit of rhythm because the space here is a little bit less than the space right there. But this is a fairly boring facade, because this is very similar, this is very similar, the distance between the door here is very similar, and this also, this distance is very similar. Where here, this house is an older house, and it's actually a better shape and better proportion. On the 3.5, it's a little bit long, but still a pretty good looking house. This is probably originally 7x9 glass, 6/6 windows. That's how you come up with this window size. Now this house has really a very interesting rhythm, where this space over here is much larger than this space over here. This space here is wider than that space there. This space here is wider than this space here. And that wasn't done because of where they wanted the windows in the room. That was done to create something that looks like a dynamic balance, with the chimneys pretty much in the center too of the roof. I think we're looking at it somewhat from the side, but the chimney's pretty much in the middle. So we have a situation which could be boring. It could be too static, but by creating a rhythm in the window placement, it all of a sudden creates more interest here than there is interest here. even though we might say we like these window sizes bigger because everybody today likes bigger windows, but that's just, you know, where we are. So anyway, massing was kind of interesting. Again, I go back to East Dorset, to the Deming Tavern. And the Deming Tavern, as we look at it, it has a critical a major mass, which is the front of the house, and it's a little bit hard to see because of the massive tree. But then, when it was enlarged to a tavern, this section came on the back here, and then a little barn got pushed up to it. That wasn't originally there. This barn came from somewhere else, and it got moved up this way, and then of course there's a little woodshed and a dependency. But as we look at it, we have this situation here, where over here, this, like, what's the real, what's the central mass here? Was this the oldest and original building, and was this added, or was this the old one and was that added? It's kind of hard to tell. So this is really an unordered or sort of a chaotic mass. And when the eye, I believe, looks at this, it sort of says, well, I don't know. I think that's kind of, just doesn't work for me as well as I would think this. And again, I'm sorry this isn't a little better picture, but anyway. Okay. What we had versus what we no longer have. This is a mill in Bennington, and that's McAdoo Rugs, I think, is in one part of it, in North Bennington. And they really did a pretty good job of saving that. And those of you who are familiar with that area know that over here there's another nice save. There's a lot of nice stone buildings over there, a stone mill, that they did a good job with. This one, unfortunately, I guess we lost. I can't remember where that one is, but just a good example where if someone had come along a little bit sooner and decided, yes, we like it, then that certainly could be that. But we don't, we have one and we don't have the other. Okay. When I was first coming around here in the 50s, this building looked almost the way these pictures show it. And it had been, there was a lot of junk in it. It had been converted to tenements. But the basic structure itself was excellent. It had a massive timber frame in it. This was the old tannery at the mill pond in Manchester Center, and it sat where the park is now. And this was demolished because the Ford garage that was there at the time needed more space. So they bought this building and there it went. But anyway, this was a fairly recent loss. I think this was demolished in 1962, I believe. And just think if, you know, the park is beautiful in Manchester, there's no question about it, in Manchester Center. But if the Kimball Mill is right here, and the mill pond is here, and if that were on the other side, and then the park were around this, and this were whatever, you know, we had decided to do with it, I think it would have been, you know, a great asset to the middle of town, but we lost that one. So again, a fairly recent loss. Again, you've seen this picture before, but the courthouse and the music hall. Well, we have the courthouse. Manchester, of course, town owns it now, and this is gone. We were pretty close to losing this building, pretty close, because the state didn't care anything about it. It was just a courthouse, and it was only used part of the year. Didn't heat very well. It was fairly expensive to maintain. It didn't show up well on the state's expenditures. And it was under the care of the side judges who were elected in Bennington County. And neither of the side judges cared at all about it because they were both from Bennington. Manchester could go to hell as far as they were concerned. And they didn't like this building. And a fellow named Rene Anselmo came along, stayed at the Equinox House, and he looked across from his room and said, "That's a beautiful building in horrible shape, and I will pay to save it." So a courthouse restoration committee was formed, and this whole bell tower was removed. And it was so rotten back in the back side of it, because with all of these buildings, this had about a 3 or 4 degree tip backwards. And so everything ran to the back and laid in the back of it and rotted out the whole backside. So anyway, I was involved in that one, and I climbed up in there and looked at that and said, wow, this is a pretty dangerous job. And so we came along with a crane and picked the whole top off the thing and rebuilt it completely and put it back up there, along with a lot of this soffit and cornice in through here that was pretty badly rotten. The roof was in tough shape. Let's see, this cornice along here was quite rotten, and there were some really bad spots in the roof, and the water was sort of leaking in. And the building was, I think, didn't look too bad. But I think if a lot of folks came along today and looked at that building in the condition that it was in, would have said, you know, it's going to cost millions to save this. Well, fortunately, Rene Anselmo had millions. He owned a Spanish language television network, and he owned a number of satellites. And he was just a guy off the street who looked at that building and said, that's a nice building. I'm going to pay to save it. So now we have it in pretty good shape. Needs a little work now. The gallery up here is getting a little bit rough. I was looking at it with binoculars the other day, and it needs some work. So the town of Manchester has to pay a little bit of attention to that one. But that was a really good save. And where are we?
Push them again.
Oh yeah, okay, thank you.
There you are.
Okay, now this is a really, really neat building. This is a mill that's over in Putney. And this, it's got its original windows in it, has a massive stone foundation down here. There's a river that comes just below it. This roof, I don't know how they framed that, this barrel roof. It's really very unique. I heard just recently that somebody's putting some money into it and saving that one. So we hope that we'll put that on the save list. What's going to happen with this one? This is a great building. Crosby's up in Danby. And I tried to figure out what to do with this place, because Elbert Crosby, when he was alive, said, you can have it, you know. And inside, of course, because it was a coal elevator, it has all kinds of really large beams running in all kinds of different directions, and it would be really hard to figure out what to do with it. And also the location is not good. You know, that's just a bad spot. Just as the railroad station that was next to it, which we lost about 10 years ago. I think, again, it was the location was the killer up there. So to move this, to do something with it, I'm afraid we're going to lose this one. And my prediction would be this one goes, this one gets saved, we hope. Anyway, so here's another really neat wagon shop. This is also over near Westminster, and that one's holding its own at the point. Guy who owns it sort of takes care of it. It's an incredibly interesting roof. It's a dandy old commercial building. Again, you know, another one, I think it's just great to ride around Vermont. You know, when you got nothing to do, take a day, ride around, just look at some of this stuff, and talk your friends into buying it and fixing it. Okay, the SD Organ Company down in Brattleboro. You can see we have some of it left. There's actually quite a bit of it's been saved. It was enormous at the time. You can see here on the insurance map, extremely unique with the slate on the exterior. And flat roofs on this particular building, how they kept that one together with a flat roof, I don't know, but it's another one that we have that's a great building. If you're down around Brattleboro, take a ride up on the hill there a little bit and check these out because they're well worth looking at. Here's another picture of that mill I showed you with the barrel roof, and there's the river that comes down through. Again, this is over in Putney. You know, it's bypassed by the interstate, by 91, but if you get there on Route 5, I think, or not Route 5, whatever it is, it runs up through there. I think you can find that one. Well worth the ride to look at. Okay. Anybody recognize that?
Williams Store.
You got it. And there it is.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So not only is our buildings gone, but Austin and Ada Rumney went. Like I guess we're all gonna do one of these days. But anyway, this was not that long ago. You know, when we think of, you know, where are we now? November 21st century. This was, what, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago when Ada and Austin were still there. And now this building, of course, is still there, and Billy Brownlee has done a terrific job down there of saving a lot of this and making sure that it stays forever. But you kind of, in hindsight, I think Billy's sort of thinking too that it would have been rather neat to have just cordoned this off and said, well, that's the way it was. Now that I think the kids' toys are in there or something. Well, anyway, this is the stove here, and that's that stove. And of course, this is the chair where just about every opinion maker in Dorset sat at one time or another. Our latest was Jack Stannard, who occupied many days there. Those of you who went in and bought your paper, Jack was there, you know, ready to tell you what he thought. And anyway, that was a real fun place. And just sort of a side story, when my son Ken was about 14 or maybe thereabouts 14, there used to be on this stovepipe that was on a slight angle, there used to be a bucket, like an old coffee can, that hung there on a wire. And there was a joint in the pipe. And the creosote would drip out of the pipe and into that bucket. And I think Kenny was learning some words in English, and we walked in there one day to buy something. And Kenny looked at Austin and he said, you know, Austin, he says, this place doesn't have much class, but it's got a lot of ambiance. And I looked at him and said, and Austin said, what are you talking about? He said, that bucket that's hanging on your pipe, collecting that creosote, he says, that's ambiance. And so it was sort of a joke for a while. We'd go in there and we'd say, hey, Austin, show us your ambiance. You know, and everybody kind of look around. Well, anyway, we not only lose buildings, but we lose what's in them and what made them happen. And you think about all the people who worked in those wagon shops and those, who were they, and you know, what were their lives like? What did they think? How different are they from us? This now, I don't know if any of you who recognize this. This is in Wells, and this is the probably the oldest existing grist mill in Vermont, and maybe it's in its original form, and it's perfectly preserved. Unfortunately, the person who owns it doesn't care at all about it, lives in a hovel right over here, and doesn't want anybody snooping around. So it's kind of hard to access this. If you're a fly fisherman, you walk up the river and then you get the pictures. But anyway, that's a great old building, again, right in our door. This is the old furnace from East Dorset. The new owner of the property asked if anybody would mind if that were demolished.
No.
I think they were informed that people would mind a lot if it were demolished, so I don't think they're planning on demolishing it. But beware, it is in danger. This is an interesting little building that came out of Battenville, New York. I moved it quite a few years ago to, it's behind the old tavern in Manchester now. And this is the Weir, W-E-I-R, wheelwright shop. And they actually, a little of my authorship, originally this had a window right there, and it had a sort of a barn door on this side that would swing open, so horses and so on could get in there. Also, it was on grade. I elevated it a little bit for my purposes. I used this as an antique shop. But this is a great building because it's a perfect example of an 1820s commercial building in a small town. And what makes it so neat is on the side here, you have these 15 panes of glass, 15 by 15 slide-by windows. And that was to let enough light in here so that whoever was working in this building, and this is in its orientation, this faces south, and I oriented it the same way, east-west on the ridge. And anyway, so that's really a neat building, and you can see the little door on the top, and there was a hoist, and they hoisted stuff up. Well, anyway, where it originally sat, it had a big ramp that went down the back, and there were double doors on the back side, and the wagons went down. So they did the ironwork downstairs to build the buggies, and then that stuff went upstairs, and the carpenter shop and the paint shop was upstairs, and they assembled the wagons up there, and then they went down the ramp in the back. So anyway, that's one that's around. It needs a roof right now. The fellow who owns the property is planning on pulling that one back together a little bit. But again, a neat building and why these commercial buildings are important is because there's so few of them really around. Because if a business was successful, they would either tear down the old building and build an all new one to their purpose, or they would simply add to the old one, and it would become unrecognizable because it was built all around. But anyway, that's one that never had anything done to it. It just sort of sat there as was, which was great. Okay, what we had versus what we no longer have. All right. Let's see. Where's that?
It's one of the four Farwell
Right.
houses.
Yep. Okay. This one we have, it's been slightly altered, but we still have it. It's on the Dorset West Road. It's just a little north of Church Street intersection. This one we still have. That was the old tavern on the corner of Dorset West Road and Church Street. And this one we don't have. It was demolished about 4 years ago. That was the Asa Farwell house. And this one we still have, which is also on the corner of the Dorset West Road and Church Street. So these four buildings that we have here were part of the historic district, and it is called the Farwell District. And it was incredibly unique because there was a first generation, a second generation, a third generation, and a fourth generation building, all built by the same family, all within the same district, and all surviving. The Asa Farwell house, this one, was built in 1805, and survived until somebody decided they didn't want to look at it anymore. Extremely sad. Anyway, 1, 2, 3, 4 generations, and much more than generations of people, but generations of houses spanning from 17, I think the original here was built about 1775, and then the latest, this one was probably about 1870, just as a guess. But anyway, it shows you how fragile things are. You know, where we were able to keep those 4 houses as the Farwell district for all that time, and we lost one of them just 10 years ago, or 6 years ago, yeah. So will the other 3 survive? Well, if it's any indication of one, they won't, unless somebody cares. Okay. This is the Squeak, and they call it Squeak because it was the Squeak family. I think many of you recognize that. That's over in Londonderry. And that, the fellow who owned the old Londonderry Mill, the restaurant, the steakhouse over there, he was pretty interested in this building, and he spent a lot of money fixing it up, doing a lot with it. And then Irene came along and really tore it up. And at that point, he decided to sell the mill and get rid of the whole property. That's where the Londonderry Farmers Market is now. And anyway, so will this survive? Again, going on or not. But it needs a lot of help at this point. A lot of people are interested in it, but he doesn't want to sell it unless you buy the whole place. He's not interested in just seeing that go. Okay. Now this is a dandy little house. Any of you can buy this, move it, put it on your property. This one's in Newfane. It's just as you go out of town. If you're heading south on Route 30, it's on your left-hand side just before you come down into town. Heading north, it's on the right as you head up the hill on the right-hand side. This has, it doesn't have its original chimney, but it's got everything else. It's a very solid, good house. It's just obviously so close to the road. Nobody has any interest in it. It needs to be moved. The interest in historic preservation today is about 0. Nobody cares, except us. And, you know, kids don't want it. They don't want houses. They don't want old houses, you know. So, again, will we save this one? I sure hope so, but it's not looking good. Okay, here's a rather ugly but rather spectacular Italianate home in St. Johnsbury that up until not very long ago was very, very well cared for. It shows you what probably 10 years of vacancy will do. Will somebody save it? I don't know. Okay, this is a little house that's in Danby. I tried to buy this house about 40 years ago, and it was in pretty good shape. It had a nice central chimney in it. It's a plank-on frame. It's about 1785. The guy had just moved out into a trailer that he put next door, and I asked him if he'd sell me the house, and he goes, no, he said, I need someplace to store my junk. So I went back a few years later, and things were looking worse, and he would never sell it, and that's it pretty much today. We're gonna lose that one, I think. So I guess that goes in the gone category. This is again over in the Westminster area. Was a beautiful old house. I think it was in an insurance or an estate dispute, and there it is. I think a lot of you have seen this one. That's up in Addison on Route 22A. This is Lake Champlain out here. Has the most spectacular view of the Adirondacks that you could ever imagine. I did read about it. I don't remember too much, but if you're ever heading up to Vergennes on Route 22A, that'll be on your left-hand side.
Chelsea.
Chelsea, thank you. Yeah, this is a great old house that's in Chelsea, sits right in the middle of Chelsea, Vermont. And who knows what's going on with it. It's been sitting there for years and years and years. It's it was a very expensive house to build with this gable on hip and these two twin chimneys, and it's got a great front door in it, lovely window treatments. It has great balance. It's just a super, super house, but you know, is that in the gone category? We hope not. Okay, that was my little carriage house. That came from the Hadwin farm up in Danby, and it was right on Route 7, on virtually exactly on the Danby Wallingford line on the left-hand side. And it was so buried in other buildings you couldn't even see it. It had an additions on all four sides, and yet that great old carriage house frame was on the inside. That was a definite gone, but it became saved, and it's now part of East Dorset. This was a wonderful barn that was over on Route 153 in Rupert that somebody tore down just because they didn't like it. This is just a great example of a banked barn with a highway. In other words, here's your highway here, and here's your bank over here. Just a really neat, kind of a funky barn because it's so tall and so interesting. I just kind of threw it in here. You know, the Battenkill Rise Farm up the road here, Jack Frost Well Drilling, that barn has two magnificent highways on the back side of it, on the west side. And Jack actually restored that and put those highways back, and Danny did the work, and they did a great job. They put the slate roof on there and the whole thing. Then, of course, Jack did the cupola at a later time. But anyway, there's been some great saves around here, but we need more. Okay, this is just a funky old turn-of-the-century place that's obviously we're going to lose. This is also on on Route 7 up in Ferrisburg, and probably one of the neatest barns ever. Again, it's a banked barn. It's got sort of a highway in here, not a real highway, but a hay door here with a gable over the top of that. Terrific cupola, just a really super barn, but I'm afraid unless somebody with a lot of money comes along, we're going to lose that one. This one here, that's right in town, of course. That's right on Route 30 here. Getting worse than in that picture. The foundation's getting kind of tired. It definitely needs some help. I couldn't resist putting that guy in the middle up there because the pitch of that roof is rather interesting, rather magnificent. That's not a photo trick. That roof is actually that steep. And I don't know. This actually could have been, Michelle thought this could have been somebody's house at one time. And the more you look at it, the more possible it is that that could have been a shack that somebody actually lived in because of the steps and the way the door goes in, and you know, anything is possible, I guess. Okay, just another neat old barn and another neat old barn. And, okay, this one is at Ye Olde Tavern, and check the time here, I guess I'm running over. When I started the restaurant there, actually Walter Clemens had owned the place for years and years, and he and his mother and sister had done some light food. They were more of a B&B kind of operation with an antique shop. But when I bought it, I couldn't figure out anything to do with it other than make it a restaurant again. So here we go. And I thought, you know, after about 6-7 months of operation, I thought my food was pretty good and service was pretty good and everything was pretty good and the place was pretty quaint. But I wasn't really doing the business that I should be doing. So Tony Perry was a good friend and the best operator anywhere. So I called Tony and I said, come on up and look around. Tell me what am I doing wrong, Tony? And he said, your biggest problem is if people can't see cars, they're not going to come. and I had only 4 parking spots in the front. And on, say, a given Thursday night, if people came at 6 or 5 o'clock to eat, they were the first cars in the parking lot. They were the first ones to leave. So I'd have only 1 car in the parking lot on Thursday night, and people would look at the place and say, oh, it only has 1 car, it can't be any good. So Tony said, you gotta tear this down so people can see your parking lot. You gotta get rid of this park. Well, I said, I can't do that, because that's history. That is part of, that's been here since
Is your answer?
18 whatever. And I'm not gonna tear that down, because that is that. And if you see the sign to the left, livery and feed, that's the sign that's there, livery and feed. So anyway, I was standing there looking at it, and I thought, well, maybe I can take it and move it off to the back this way. Or maybe I can take it and move it over behind the tavern that way and open this up. And then all of a sudden, in a fit of craziness, I said, aha, guess what? I can blow a couple of holes in this thing, then you can see the cars out back. So that's why it's the way it is. Anyway, so that's the story on that. This next door, Allied Auto Parts, to what you just saw, this was originally a stone blacksmith shop. This whole thing right here is stone. If you go inside Allied Auto Parts, you'll see it's all stone inside. Well, that was the old blacksmith shop. They then added a 2nd floor on it as a wagon shop, and somebody put this really hideous roof on it. And then when it, I think Joe, some Hosley, had it as a gas station, and then they added this piece to it. Anyway, this is savable. I tried to buy it, but the price was just too high. But I planned on tearing this off, getting rid of that roof, getting back to the stone here, doing a good job with the wood building that had been added on the top, and but I couldn't, it just didn't work. It was too expensive. So anyway, gone or not, who knows? Okay, just plain weird, ugly, or not worth saving. Well, this falls into the weird. Remember I talked about on commercial buildings, they either expanded them or tore them down? Well, here they didn't, here they expanded it. This was our original mill building here. And they said, well, we don't want to spend the money on brick, let's just do this. So they did, and there it is. It's in Tunbridge, it works, it's still there. This is really weird. I think this is a contemporary building, has something to do with power or something, but it's brick, very interesting, sort of out of scale cupola on it, just plain weird.
Where is that?
I'm trying to think. I took that picture so long ago. I'm trying to think. Somehow West Rutland, kind of up in there someplace. I just can't. We know this one, the old Dupree farm
Oh, yeah.
on Route 30 on the left-hand side.
Yep.
Donnie came to me and said, how much will it cost to put windows in that house? I said, $10,000. And lo and behold, Donnie put his own windows in there. So there it is. Old Dewey Dupree owned everything from that house to the Batten Kill and 100 acres behind it.
Was that always a house?
Always a house, yeah. Yep. Okay. This is in Middlesex. It's an octagonal silo. If you don't have the money to buy a Unadilla and you live in Vermont, there you go. Will that be saved? I sure hope so, because that's really neat. Okay, this is just kind of fun, All right, should be gone. This was, once upon a time, that wasn't a bad house, but boy, somebody sure screwed it up. There's a beauty for you. This is what happens when, again, as I said earlier, when the architect eats the covers off the books.
saying those are just poor because of the paint, maybe.
But, why, well, they're lousy for many reasons. Why, this thing is so heavy on the right-hand side, it's tipping over, it's out of balance. This thing is a complete architectural mess. Nothing works, 3.5, there's nothing there. There's no scale, there's no nothing. And yet, this is more the norm.
Oh, yes, right.
In other words, we started at the beginning, why is restoration important? Why is it important to understand this stuff? Because if you don't, this is what you get. And you know what they say, in most cases you deserve what you get. More beauties. Is this common in today's developments all through Pennsylvania, Maryland, Vermont, Maine, Florida, common everywhere? Absolutely everything is wrong with that architecture, you know? And again, you know where that one is. A little bit south of town. Again, huge architectural faux pas. Just absolutely the worst. Welcome to my garage.
Where's the residence?
Now, house or motel? How does it get any worse than that?
Shutters.
Yeah, one shutter. And I like this one from a ski standpoint. You got the beginner slope over here and the expert slope over here. And we'll end with, that's why we all should study a little bit of Greek architecture. Thank you very much. If you have any comments, questions, ideas, or,
I have a question.
yeah,
The one they moved up to Shelburne, did they do that, did they take it apart, or did they move it?
piece by piece, and actually
Okay.
went by rail.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
The schoolhouse in North Dorset that you had a picture
Right.
of, every time we drive by there, do people know who own it? Has anyone,
Yeah, a guy named,
talked to the
named
people who own it?
Steve Cook.
Yeah, the
Steve-
son owns it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Ruth, Marge
Marge's
Cook
son,
was the mother.
right.
And she had the antique shop
Right,
there. They
okay.
took good care of it, but unfortunately, there's a little bit of alcohol in the family at this point, and we see that so often with these houses, you know, they just, you know, it's a sad sickness, you know, you can't do anything about it, it's just, you know. I mean, Jeff is a nice guy, but he's just sick. And that's it.
What about the guy who put up his own money, you said, to restore the courthouse?
Renee and Solomon.
How did he do that? Like, did he, officially establish a 501c3 and then
No,
be able to take
he
a tax
does that
write-off?
all over the country. And he has a company, a management group who I worked with. He sent his agent to, actually, we formed the Courthouse Restoration Committee, and then he sent his agent to the Courthouse Restoration Committee and signed a contract. And then we proceeded with the work. And it was an open-ended budget.
Wow.
Just again, I'm beyond my time here, but just back to the courthouse. That paint that's on there is an elastomeric. And way back when, it was a $40,000 paint job. And everybody thought at that point that was just outrageously expensive, but the same paint job is still there. And in a couple of places, the water had gotten under it a little bit, but it was repaired. But it just goes to show you, doing it right is worth it. Yes?
What year was that the fellow, made that decision?
I'm just trying to think, it had to have been about around 1990. I think, yeah. And if you go in the courthouse, there is a dedication to Anselmo on the left as you go in. Now, he He wanted to do that anonymously. He didn't even want anybody to know his name. But we insisted that he get credit for it because he's such a philanthropist, you know. He- yeah. Yes, sir.
Do you communicate with real estate people at all to encourage?
Well, we try, yeah, I mean, I spent quite a few years on the design review board here in Dorset and for the historic district. And tell you very honestly, the real estate people aren't very interested in anything other than the sale. In fact, they don't refuse, but they certainly are not eager to tell people when they are buying in the historic district that they are buying in the historic district.
Yeah, it could clear the deal.
Yeah, they sort of cover that up because people don't understand historic districts, you know, there's no, I mean, you have the criteria in the historic district that's voted on by all. It's part of the zoning bylaws. But it's, for all practical purposes, it's very non-restrictive, you know, and the same thing, of course, with the Asa Farwell house that was demolished. I mean, that was a very important house in the historic district, and the owner decided to demolish it, so he did. You know, there's nothing says you can't do it.
I think you need to differentiate too between a historic district and a design review district.
Yeah.
I mean, Dorset Village being a historic district is just a title. But what clicks in is the fact that the town adopted it as a design review
Design review.
district. And so the architecture can't be changed without going through a process.
Right.
But I can't remember why it was that the Farwell house was able to be taken down. I guess the hue and cry wasn't strong
They-
enough.
Oh, well,
It was, but.
yeah, I was incensed about that, and I went over and took a picture of the zoning permit on a tree with the house in the background, and it had a big Z, and under the Z it said demolition.
Right.
And I posted that all over the place and said, something has to be done here because this house is going to be demolished, et cetera, so on and so forth. And if I had put a post up there that Mickey Mouse eats Cheerios, there would have been more interest. There was no interest.
There's no demolition delay ordinance the way we had in Connecticut, so
No.
a certain amount of time would be publicized and.
No,
Not a bad idea.
no, he simply went to the zoning administrator granted a demolition permit, and it went down,
Yeah, there's a-
period.
There's a trailer.
Yeah, now the
Toaster.
trailer's there, right? Yeah, well,
Well, there's an
thank,
airstrip.
thanks, but it isn't, yeah, at least it's not a rockwood or something. So
Oh,
thank you so
Peter,
much.
thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thanks, John.
Just a couple quick things I want to mention. First of all, with the Farwell house, as I understand it, there was an effort to get a cease and desist order, but it was demolished before it could be issued. Also, about the house in North Dorset that went up to the Shelburne Museum, I am almost contractually obligated to mention this. It is a long-standing Dorset Historical Society tradition to mention this. The house was moved up in the late 50s, early 60s. The Historical Society here was founded in 1963. As far as I can tell from documentation and all of that, one of the first acts of the Historical Society was to send a letter to the Shelburne Museum to let them know that the North Dorset house in fact came from North Dorset, not East Dorset as they were insisting.
Yeah.
Their postcards and literature still say East Dorset, and so every time I meet with anyone, and my predecessors have met with anyone from the Shelburne Museum, we have reminded them that it's North Dorset, and nothing has been done. This is 58 years strong tradition.
Yeah.
So I'm maintaining it. If anyone from Shelburne Museum is watching, North Dorset. Anyway, thank you very much. We'll see you all, I hope, in 2022. Have a great March through the holidays. And Nan Van Bear does have some snacks for us to munch on, so please partake. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you.
What's up?